In a quiet suburban neighborhood, lined with perfectly trimmed lawns and identical mailboxes, life seemed serene, almost picture-perfect. Families waved to each other on morning walks, kids rode bikes down the cul-de-sac, and the occasional bark of a dog was the only sound breaking the morning calm. For most residents, this neighborhood was a sanctuary, a haven of order and harmony. But beneath the polished exterior, tension had a way of bubbling quietly, waiting for the right spark to ignite chaos. And in this neighborhood, that spark had a name: Karen. Karen was the kind of neighbor who always knew everyone's business, and not in a friendly way. She had an eagle-eye attention to detail, a list of rules in her head that went far beyond the official HOA regulations, and an unshakable conviction that she alone could define what was acceptable. Whether it was the exact height of grass, the color of porch lights, or the frequency of garage door use, Karen believed it was her duty to enforce her own version of order. Most neighbors quietly endured her petty criticisms, dismissing them as eccentricities. But when she set her sights on someone, there was no ignoring it. The story began innocuously, with a small dog named Max. Max was a golden retriever, beloved by his owner, a man who had moved into the neighborhood 3 years earlier. Every morning, Max would trot alongside his owner on walks, wagging his tail at every passerby, soaking in the warmth of a peaceful community. For the first few years, life was uneventful, the routine comforting. But one morning, everything shifted. It started with noise complaints. At first, they were minor and seemingly absurd. A complaint that Max barked too enthusiastically at a squirrel, a comment that the doorbell rang too loudly. The HOA sent polite notices, and the owner complied, adjusting Max's routine, softening his voice when scolding the dog, even installing a noise-reducing mat near the door. He assumed these complaints were just minor annoyances, little quirks of living in a community that prized control. But then the complaints escalated. Notices arrived almost daily, always meticulously detailed, often citing times and behaviors that seemed impossible. Max was a dog that only barked when he was genuinely excited or alarmed, yet Karen's complaints described elaborate scenarios of supposed disturbances at hours when Max was asleep. Soon, the HOA began questioning the owner's compliance. He felt the subtle pressure, the quiet suspicion, as if the entire board was being swayed by a neighbor's relentless accusations. What initially seemed like petty nuisance turned sinister the morning Max disappeared. One day, the dog didn't come bounding down the driveway as usual. He wasn't in the backyard, he wasn't inside the house. Max was simply gone. Panic set in immediately. The owner searched every corner of the neighborhood, calling his dog's name until his voice grew hoarse. Posters were printed, phone calls made, and neighbors offered their support, but none had seen Max. A gnawing suspicion began to form. The timing of Max's disappearance was too convenient. And there was only one neighbor who seemed to have had the motivation and audacity to act this way. Karen. At first, the idea felt impossible. How could a seemingly ordinary woman, a resident of the same community, orchestrate such a brazen theft? And yet, every interaction, every complaint, every sly comment over the past months suddenly aligned into a pattern. She had been escalating tension carefully, slowly isolating the owner with accusations, then positioning herself as a model neighbor in front of the HOA. It was a classic setup, one that could only have been intentional. The owner's determination hardened. He began observing Karen, noting her comings and goings, recording small interactions, and paying closer attention to the neighbors who might unwittingly support her narrative. Every glance, every suspicious smile, every casual comment was cataloged in his mind, piecing together what might have been an elaborate scheme. Late one evening, as he reviewed the security cameras he had recently installed on his property, a revelation struck him. There she was, Karen, tiptoeing near his backyard fence at an unusual hour, her hands reaching through the gate. The footage was grainy, but it was unmistakable. Karen's silhouette moving with deliberate caution, her intent clear. The sense of betrayal was overwhelming. This wasn't a minor HOA squabble anymore. It was personal, calculated, and invasive. The realization hit him that Karen had taken Max deliberately, probably thinking she could control the narrative, manipulate the HOA board, and humiliate him in the process. The neighborhood, which had once seemed so calm and secure, now felt like a stage for a drama that he never asked to participate in. As the days passed, tension escalated further. Karen's demeanor remained pristine in public, her smiles and polite greetings masking the chaos she had sown. The HOA board, largely unaware of the full scope of her actions, continued to reference her complaints, inadvertently siding with her in official communications. The owner's frustration grew with every passing day, each letter from the HOA serving as a reminder of the unseen power Karen wielded. Determined to uncover the truth, the owner began a meticulous investigation. He expanded his CCTV coverage, documenting every unusual movement in the neighborhood. He spoke to other residents discreetly, gathering testimonies about times they had seen Karen in places she shouldn't have been. Patterns emerged, and what was once suspicion became evidence. He compiled footage, screenshots, timestamps, and detailed notes, carefully preparing for the confrontation he knew would be necessary. Despite the careful preparation, the owner remained cautious. Karen had proven herself cunning, capable of twisting even the simplest events to her advantage. Any misstep could be used against him in the eyes of the HOA, which seemed increasingly eager to maintain the appearance of order. Yet, the bond he shared with Max and the principle of justice outweighed fear. He resolved to confront Karen directly, but not in private. This had become a matter of public accountability, and the HOA board, the very institution that had been manipulated, needed to witness the truth firsthand. And so, the stage was set. The quiet neighborhood, once a haven of routine and civility, was about to become the arena for a showdown that no one could have anticipated. A stolen dog, falsified complaints, and a manipulative neighbor had created a storm, and the calm before the storm was ending. What had begun as a simple act of control was about to unravel in a spectacle of revelation, where reputations would be tested, and a community would witness the lengths some would go to impose their will. As night fell over the neighborhood, the owner reviewed his evidence one last time, the glow of computer screens reflecting determination in his eyes. He knew the next steps had to be precise, calculated, and undeniable. Tomorrow, the HOA meeting would become more than a routine assembly. It would be the battleground where truth and deceit collided. The morning sun cast a golden hue over the quiet streets, yet the air in the neighborhood felt unusually heavy. Neighbors began to gather at the HOA clubhouse, drawn by the routine monthly meeting, or so they thought. Most residents carried their coffees, exchanged polite greetings, and settled into chairs, unaware that today's meeting would shatter the illusion of calm that had always cloaked their suburban enclave. Rumors had circulated for days, whispers of tension, a missing dog, and accusations that seemed too wild to be true. Yet the presence of the owner, armed with evidence, promised that the whispers were about to become reality. Inside the clubhouse, Karen arrived with her usual air of composure. Her hair was perfectly styled, her outfit impeccably coordinated, and her smile that polite, practiced smile that had fooled so many before. To the untrained eye, she was the embodiment of civility, a model resident concerned with the well-being of the community. But behind that facade lay calculation and cunning. Karen had no idea that today, her carefully constructed narrative was about to collapse. The owner entered moments later, carrying a laptop and a stack of organized files. His face was calm but determined, every step measured. He set up his equipment at the front of the room, ensuring that the projector was functional, the screen visible to all. Neighbors glanced curiously, sensing that this meeting would not follow the usual agenda. The HOA board, a mix of veteran residents and newer faces, exchanged uncertain looks. They had received notices about the escalating complaints, but the full story, the alleged theft, the manipulation, had never been presented so concretely. The meeting began, and the HOA president called the session to order. Karen, as expected, opened with her prepared statements, recounting complaints about supposed disturbances, disruptions, and inconsistencies in the owner's handling of his dog. Her words were precise, rehearsed, and presented with a confidence that demanded authority. Several board members nodded, accustomed to treating her concerns seriously. But then, without warning, the owner began his presentation. The screen lit up with footage, timestamps, and images carefully curated to illustrate a timeline of Karen's actions. The room fell silent as the first video played. The grainy night vision footage showed Karen creeping near the owner's backyard, her hands reaching over the fence. The movements were deliberate, unmistakably her attempt to remove something, Max, the beloved dog. Neighbors gasped, eyes widening in shock as the narrative they had only heard in fragments was confirmed visually. Karen's face, once composed, twitched imperceptibly, a flicker of panic betraying her rehearsed calm. The owner moved systematically through his evidence. Screenshots of past complaints were juxtaposed with actual events, revealing exaggerations and inconsistencies. Witness statements from other residents confirmed her suspicious behavior. Seen near the backyard at odd hours, boasting subtly about keeping things in order, and attempting to manipulate others into supporting her narrative. Each revelation added weight to the mounting case against Karen that as the presentation progressed, murmurs spread through the room. Longtime neighbors shook their heads, realizing that the complaints they had dismissed or quietly supported were not just petty annoyances. They were part of a deliberate campaign. The tension grew palpable, the atmosphere thick with disbelief, outrage, and the satisfaction of justice slowly crystallizing. Karen tried to interject, to deflect blame, to argue misinterpretation, but the visual evidence was undeniable. Every attempt she made was met with stifled laughter, raised eyebrows, or the pointed glance of a neighbor who had been silently observing all along. The HOA board, previously inclined to take Karen's side, began to shift. Questions were directed at her. Why were the times on her complaints inconsistent? Why had she been near the owner's property without permission? Why were other neighbors corroborating suspicious activity that directly contradicted her claims? Karen's responses grew defensive, her poised demeanor cracking as she realized the scope of the exposure. The power she had wielded with subtle intimidation was slipping through her fingers like sand. Finally, the owner revealed the most damning piece of evidence. A short clip showing Max, safe but clearly distressed, being returned by a neighbor who had secretly witnessed Karen's theft. The dog bounded back to his owner, tail wagging, and the room erupted in murmurs of shock and relief. The culmination of months of manipulation had been laid bare in a single, undeniable moment. Karen's face, once confident, now flushed with embarrassment and fury. The room, once a neutral ground for HOA deliberations, had become the stage for a full revelation of her misconduct. The neighborhood's reaction was immediate. Residents whispered among themselves, sharing incredulity and outrage. Some longtime neighbors who had quietly tolerated Karen's antics expressed relief that the truth was finally out. Others, shocked at the extent of her manipulation, openly criticized her actions, questioning how such behavior had gone unchecked for so long. The board, realizing the seriousness of the situation, had no choice but to acknowledge the evidence presented. Notices of prior complaints were retracted, and discussions of disciplinary action began to take shape. Karen, realizing she had lost control, attempted one last desperate maneuver. She raised her voice, trying to frame the narrative as a misunderstanding, claiming the owner had misinterpreted events. But her words fell flat. The evidence was too strong, the witnesses too credible, and the neighborhood's perception had shifted irrevocably. The power she had once wielded so effortlessly was gone, replaced by scrutiny, judgment, and a collective awareness of her duplicity. By the end of the meeting, the owner had accomplished more than just retrieving Max or disproving the complaints. He had exposed a pattern of manipulation that had affected multiple residents, revealing the hidden dynamics of control that Karen had used to dominate the HOA's perception. The neighborhood, previously fractured by subtle tension and whispered complaints, found a new sense of clarity. Justice, in this case, was not quiet or private. It was public, undeniable, and irreversible. As residents left the meeting, conversations buzzed with disbelief, support, and speculation about the next steps. Karen retreated, her authority dismantled, forced to face the consequences of her actions under the watchful eyes of an entire community. The stolen dog was safe, but the lesson was clear. In a neighborhood bound by rules, civility, and shared trust, deception could be exposed, and manipulation would not go unchallenged. The storm had passed, but the aftermath was just beginning. Relationships would be tested, reputations forever altered, and the memory of the dramatic HOA showdown would linger in the neighborhood for months to come. For the owner, the victory was bittersweet. Max was home, but the ordeal had revealed a deeper truth about vigilance, accountability, and the lengths some neighbors would go to impose their will. And so, as the sun dipped below the suburban skyline, the owner walked home with Max trotting happily beside him, knowing that the confrontation had changed more than just the outcome of a few complaints. It had reshaped the entire dynamic of the neighborhood, proving that even the most controlling forces could be brought to light when courage, preparation, and truth aligned. The days following the explosive HOA meeting were charged with a mixture of tension, relief, and gossip. Neighbors whispered in driveways, exchanged glances across lawns, and checked in with each other, all aware that the events of the past week had shaken the community to its core. The stolen dog, Max, now happily returned to his owner, had become a symbol of the ordeal, a living reminder that manipulation and deceit could be confronted and justice could prevail. Yet the story was far from over. Karen, whose reputation had been publicly dismantled, now faced the aftermath of her actions, both socially and legally. In the immediate aftermath, Karen's presence in the neighborhood became tense and uncomfortable. The same neighbors who had once smiled politely or nodded in agreement to her minor grievances now avoided eye contact, some even crossing the street to bypass her. Social invitations she had taken for granted were quietly rescinded, and casual conversations that had once been opportunities for subtle control turned cold and distant. The subtle power she had wielded for months evaporated in the face of public exposure, leaving her isolated and vulnerable. The HOA board convened a special session to address the events formally. The board, now fully aware of the depth of Karen's manipulation, drafted measures to prevent future abuses of power. Fines were issued for false complaints, rules were clarified to protect residents from harassment, and policies for reporting suspicious activity were reinforced. Karen was placed on probation within the HOA, her privileges restricted, and she was officially censured for her actions. The board's decision sent a clear message: deception and intimidation would not be tolerated, and the community's trust could not be exploited. Meanwhile, the owner of Max became something of an unlikely hero in the neighborhood. Though he had initially wished to avoid conflict, his careful documentation, calm resolve, and methodical presentation of evidence had not only vindicated him but had restored faith among neighbors. Residents approached him, thanking him for his courage and commending the way he had handled the situation with dignity. Max, blissfully unaware of the drama surrounding him, continued his daily routines: morning walks, playful romps in the backyard, and loyal companionship. But now with an added layer of community admiration surrounding him and his owner. Karen's attempts to regain control were met with resistance at every turn. Private appeals to the HOA board fell flat, as the members remained cautious and skeptical. Efforts to charm or intimidate neighbors were met with polite but firm boundaries. Even her social media posts, once filled with subtle jabs and boasts, were scrutinized, and many neighbors chose to disengage entirely. It became clear to Karen that the suburban stage she had tried to dominate no longer welcomed her performance. Her influence had been stripped away by the very community she had sought to manipulate. Beyond social consequences, Karen's actions also triggered legal scrutiny. The theft of Max, although motivated by petty control, was a crime, and local authorities had been notified. The video evidence, combined with corroborating witness statements, formed a clear case of unlawful taking. The possibility of fines, mandatory restitution, and even community service loomed over her, adding a tangible weight to the humiliation she was already enduring. The legal ramifications reinforced the social lessons that had been unfolding in the HOA meeting: the importance of accountability and the real-world consequences of deceptive behavior. For the neighborhood as a whole, the ordeal left an indelible mark. Residents became more vigilant, aware that even in the calmest communities, unchecked control and subtle harassment could fester if ignored. Relationships were tested, but bonds between trustworthy neighbors strengthened. Conversations shifted from casual gossip to constructive dialogue about community standards, personal boundaries, and the importance of transparency. Max's return served as a daily reminder that vigilance, combined with courage and meticulous planning, could safeguard the peace of the neighborhood. Over the following weeks, the atmosphere gradually stabilized. Karen, now largely isolated, maintained a presence that was more subdued than before. The neighbors, once wary of her influence, returned to a rhythm of normalcy, enjoying barbecues, morning jogs, and weekend gatherings without the shadow of manipulation. The HOA implemented clearer channels for reporting issues, prioritizing fairness and evidence over subjective complaints. The sense of community, though shaken, emerged stronger for having confronted adversity together. The owner of Max continued to live quietly, his focus returning to everyday life, but the experience left him more attuned to the nuances of neighborhood dynamics, the subtle power plays, the importance of documentation, and the necessity of standing up for what was right. Max, oblivious to the human drama, remained a source of joy, his presence a comforting anchor in a community that had weathered a storm of deceit and emerged with clarity and justice intact. In the end, Karen's actions became a cautionary tale within the neighborhood. Her attempts to control, manipulate, and steal were exposed in full view of the community, leaving her with social isolation, HOA sanctions, and potential legal consequences. The experience underscored a universal truth: power derived from fear and deception is fragile, while courage and transparency can restore balance even in the most carefully controlled environments. The final image of the neighborhood was one of quiet restoration. Children played safely in the yards, neighbors exchanged friendly nods, and the routine of suburban life resumed, now tempered by a shared understanding of vigilance and accountability. Max, wagging his tail and chasing a ball through the grass, symbolized the triumph of trust, love, and community over deceit and manipulation. And as the sun set over the quiet streets, the story of a stolen dog, a controlling Karen, and the community that refused to be manipulated settled into memory. A dramatic chapter in the life of a neighborhood, remembered not for conflict alone, but for the courage and unity that ultimately prevailed.